Just very quickly, because there is some new folks and I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. My name is Badr Milligan. I've been podcasting for about 10 years. I'm one of the co-founders of the Jax Podcasters Unite group. And the real beauty and brains of the operation is, I don't know if she's on your screen like mine, but Blythe Brumleaf is a co-founder as well. So we appreciate you guys hopping on for this virtual happy hour. I think we've only done maybe two, maybe this might be our third virtual event in a minute. And this is something that we're hoping to incorporate a little more. It gives us the flexibility to talk about industry topics and things going on in the podcast world, as well as being able to do like a dedicated Q&A that's a little more hands-on. We could share our screen and things like that. Obviously, we'll still do the in-person meetups, but we wanted to go ahead and start doing more virtual meetups. Blythe, did you want to add anything to the intro before we dive into the topics?
No, I'm ready to dive in.
All right, so let's go ahead and start with, I guess I'll share my screen first. Oh, it looks like you disabled share screen.
No, you should be able to.
It's telling me no go.
Multiple parts. Try it now.
Okay, done deal. Oh, perfect. Okay. Let me see. All right. Okay, let me switch over my screen. Okay, I'm glad that Rich brought up just having an idea of what are realistic stats. Like, I don't think there is a definitive guidebook or handbook that tells you 100 downloads in 1 week is great, 1,000 is phenomenal, whatever it may be. There is no definitive guidebook. And I think one thing we've always preached with the JPU is that everyone's goals for podcasting are going to be unique to themselves. They're going to be different from person to person. Some people want to achieve those numbers. They want to hit those high numbers. Some folks want to get sponsorship deal, monetize their podcast. Others simply want to do it for as a hobby, educational, entertainment. I think it really comes down to what is your specific goal. And that's the first thing that I would say if you are getting into podcasting or you're thinking about jumping into this medium is figuring out and solidifying what are your goals for the show. I don't think they need to be absolutely set in stone when you first begin. Obviously, those goals and those goals can change as you progress in your podcast journey. But having an idea of what is success to me, is it getting 100 subscribers or getting a sponsor or getting opportunities or getting a business lead because of my podcast? There's a wide range of goals of goals that you can have as a podcaster and what defines success for you. And like I was saying earlier, Rich brought it up that he mentioned that in comparison to the bigger podcasts that, I think he said 1 million downloads a second, which is pretty funny, but probably not outside the realm of possibility. But these charts, like this is the top 50 most listened to podcasts of Q4 of 2022. So pretty recent. You see the same names: the Joe Rogan Experience, Crime Junkie, The Daily, The American Life, Call Her Daddy, The Ramsey Show, Drink Champs, et cetera, et cetera. Most of these charts look pretty alike. Obviously, you go to Spotify, a lot of their shows are in the top billing, but it can be easy to constantly see these shows and understand the metrics and the listeners that they're pulling in and feel intimidated or maybe even uninspired that your show that's getting 20 downloads a week or 100 downloads a month is a drop in the bucket. But I want you guys to remember that these aren't your competition, right? Like these shows have corporate backing. They have resources well beyond any of our means. Like they've got teams, they've got dedicated marketing teams, they've got huge budgets. They've got teams dedicated to bringing on big name guests. So I want you guys to get that out of the way and out of your minds first and foremost, is that you cannot compare yourselves to the top 50 charts, to these massive shows on these top 50 charts that you constantly see. I think you're doing yourself an unfair service trying to compete with these folks here. Blythe, do you want to add any of that?
I was going to say really quick, if you're showing your screen, we can't see it. So I don't know if you were showing yours at that point, but you were on a roll, so I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh my God. I was on a hot streak. What's going on?
But while you're doing that, I will see. Oh, okay. Here we go. All right. So now we got the screen share going. We'll add to the fact of when I first started podcasting in 2014. And at the time, I just wanted more experience. I just wanted to to get that initial experience. That was my initial goal. Then the next goal was, okay, I want to talk to athletes. I want to talk to people in the know. I started getting those goals. And then the goalposts continued to change after that. I launched a business podcast. That business podcast was a way for me to connect connect with folks who might potentially buy something from me. So not only is it customer research, but it's also from the lens of these people might actually do business with me. What kind of questions do they have? How can I answer that with future content in order to help not just them, but maybe other people experiencing the same thing, that they could then become a customer? And then it grew enough to where I started having interest in or sponsors started showing interest in the show itself. And so while I think everybody starts off with a podcast to say, I want to make money off of this, and it would be great, but realistically, it might, depending on the niche that you pick, depending on what ROI looks like for you, that is going to be different for every single podcast. So to compare yourself to some of these big, look at number 3 on Badr's screen right now. Number 3, The Daily. You know how many people they have working on that podcast? More than 50 people working on one podcast. So all of these shows have several people, teams of people working nonstop on these podcasts. And plus, they're also entertainment based. And so looking at it from that lens, it would be challenging to think that you could compete with a show that has 26 people working on it. But then there's also the glass half full, where a lot of these shows typically don't last very long, especially celebrity driven shows. But if you just keep churning out quality content, you'll find what that ROI looks like for you.
Said, and to add an anecdotal take as well, I remember I mentioned landing or having some form of idea of what success in a goal looks like to you early on. That was something I didn't take that advice early on in my journey. I think for the first 6 years of podcasting, I was simply doing it because it was fun. It was cathartic. That might not be the right word, but it was fun, and it gave me an opportunity
Cathartic.
to hang out. Cathartic. Thank you so much. It was a fun hobby. It gave me an opportunity to hang out with friends, and there was something about being able to share my passion about comic books and movies with not only my friends, but also listeners, knowing that people in my city were listening to the show and enjoying it. It wasn't until 6 years in that I had kept my head down, just focusing on the content, making a good show, getting better at editing, like getting better at interviews. And I think maybe my biggest goal at the time was probably to interview like someone that wrote a book I like or something like that. It wasn't until maybe 6 years in that my goals started shifting to, all right, how do I monetize this? How do I use my platform to get opportunities that wouldn't be available to me on my own, such as being able to travel to other cities to do speak at conventions and host panels. So that'd be a case of those are, I think for niche podcasts and hobbies like that, mine being comic books and pop culture, those are, in my mind, realistic goals that I think anyone could achieve. Speaking about, we've talked about goals and setting those, and obviously those will differ from person to person and what type of show you have. I want to talk about, I'm trying to move it right here. Sorry about that. All right, there we go. Next up, I want to talk about what does realistic benchmarks for what are good download numbers, what are good milestones to hit when it comes to gauging like your download numbers. Because obviously, regardless of what your goal is, your stats are going to play a part in that, right? They're going to help drive where your show goes. They should help you decide like how to advance your show, improvements, things like that. I think regardless of what your goal is or what your podcast is about, stats do play an important role. And I'll never say get obsessed with your stats to where it's driving you crazy or prohibiting you from enjoying what you're doing. But I do say that there is a level of importance to stats that it took, once again, 6 years in, I had no idea how to use stats for the benefit of my show. And for the longest time, I had no idea of what is good stats. I think that's something that's pretty hard to find online. Prior to today's event, I was looking for what are the metrics? What is like a decent amount of stats? And I continue to come to Buzzsprout platform stats, which they publish every month. This one here is the April 2023 one. Obviously, next month they'll have the May stats. But I have come to find that this has been the most definitive tool when it comes to trying to figure out what is the average downloads for other podcasts look like. I see the charts all the time. I know Joe Rogan's always number one, but how many downloads is he getting? That's information that you don't, or maybe I think in his case, you probably do have an idea, but for the average podcast outside of the top 50, what are those numbers? And it's hard to find. So I highly recommend utilizing this as much as you can. And I'm going to quickly walk you through this. So off the bat, I think this is a good reference because Buzzsprout being one of the largest podcast hosting companies out there, the fact that they make this information transparent is, do not take it for granted. I tried to look for other podcast hosting sites that offer this, and I'll be honest, I just had a hard time finding it. So if they do have it, I couldn't find it. So don't take advantage, or I guess don't overlook this very free and transparent tool. Off the bat, we know that this is a decent sample size. We're looking at 100 on Buzzsprout alone. There is over, we'll just call it 128,000 podcasts that host their podcast on Buzzsprout. So you know that you're getting like very strong sample size and statistics to measure off of. We're seeing over 138 million monthly downloads from those 127 plus thousand shows. You also get an idea of where a lot of these downloads are coming from. Regardless of how Spotify may market, Apple Podcasts in this case is still crushing it in terms of being the #1 podcast app or source for podcast downloads. We see in April alone, they had close to 38% of the market share, or I'm sorry, of downloads were the source of downloads for podcasts on Buzzsprout. And then obviously Spotify afterwards, and then you go on and on. I will stop here and say that understanding your unique stats is also very important, because what you see here is this is an amalgam and an average for these total active podcasts. But in my case, I believe my web browser and Overcast is like #2. So depending on your unique stats, your source of downloads might be coming from somewhere else. Have an understanding of how your stats look like, so you could look at something like this and make educated comparisons. Not a major surprise here, but obviously the US still leading in regards of countries for podcast downloads for Buzzsprout. Apple iPhone, which kind of correlates with Apple Podcasts being the #1 app. Then you got device types. But I think out of all of this stuff, even though it's all really great information, the most important thing I look at when I come to this page is the episode downloads. Pardon me. Is the episode downloads. And what it's telling you here is that for every episode that comes out in its first 7 days in regards to downloads, you can look at this, engage and tell where you sit in regards to those 127 plus thousand podcasts. So if your new episode comes out and in its first 7 days gets 32 downloads, we're talking, you're already in the top 50% median of podcasts. 32 downloads. How real? That is super realistic. That's reassuring. That's encouraging at that, right? Like I think when you hear podcasters always aim for those big numbers, the thousands, the hundreds, et cetera, but 32 would already put you at the top 50%, which I think is remarkable. And then obviously it starts jumping. And I want to highlight too, just the range and the chasm between these different pockets. 110 downloads puts you at the top 25%. If you get 440 downloads in this first week, episode gets 440 downloads in this first week, you're now at the 10%. And then look how much it jumps from the 10% to the 5% and then the 1%. We're talking top 1% of 127,000 is what, 127 shows? My math is probably terrible, but I think the picture is still very clear that success if download numbers are your metric, your main metric for success, then it is surprising how realistic and achievable that goal really is. Now, it depends on what your goal is, but if you're trying to aim for 100, then you're going to break into the top 25%, which I think is great. And then in addition to that, you've also got episode duration. You can understand where your if you do an hour plus show, you're among the 16% of podcasts on Buzzsprout. Same thing for episodes published every couple of days. I think a majority of folks publish once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks. So this is a valuable resource in terms of measuring your stats, if that's your metric for success, in comparison to a very large and reliable sample pool. Yeah, we're not seeing like stats like this being shared really anywhere else. The only other place that, not to continue showing Buzzsprout bias, the only other kind of information I found in regards to that, another large podcast hosting company, Libsyn. This was an article from 2020. This is like the latest I could find. They were saying that the typical show had a median of 130 downloads during its first weeks. They don't really specify what is first weeks. Is that the first 2 weeks, first 3 weeks, etc. After publishing. To put that into perspective, their VP of Podcaster Relations said that if episodes are getting more than 130 downloads after 30 days, they are better than half the shows being published, which sounds encouraging. 130 downloads after 130 days is pretty reasonable. It's very achievable. but we're also not sure in comparison to what you're better than half of how many shows. Decent stats to work off of. I think they're similar in line with Buzzsprout. But what I like about this page is that you have a number to bet against. Blythe, did you want to chime in for this one?
Yeah. Is this when I start my iHeart slander?
Yes, you have full release the Kraken.
Okay.
Go.
Another thing to keep in mind too is that a lot of these bigger players are gaming the system. One of those companies is iHeartRadio, which obviously most of us are aware of the different radio stations that iHeart has. They also have the iHeartRadio app. And so if you notice on a lot of different podcasting charts, PodTrack is one of those charts where advertisers will go and check the top podcasts in order to see which shows are doing the best, which shows are maybe a little bit further down the rankings, which shows aren't ranking at all. And so for a lot of these top companies, they show up consistently in the top of the list of the top publishers for the number of downloads that their shows are getting. Bloomberg did an investigation back in October of last year, and they discovered that iHeartRadio has been gaming the system. And the way that they game the system is that they buy those really crap mobile games that you see an ad for on a random website or inside of a mobile game, and you're getting served that ad. Well, when people would click on that ad inside of those little games, then it would take them to a podcast page, and the download for the podcast would immediately start playing. Now, this is how they were counting podcast downloads. And obviously, that is a conflict of interest because the person who is clicking that ad is likely not knowing that they're going to a page where a podcast is going to play. And so when that podcast is played, it counts towards a download towards that podcast. They were caught artificially inflating their numbers by estimates around 6 million. And they are not the only ones. iHeart is not the only ones. Bloomberg also released Ashley Carmen, who is the audio podcast writer for Bloomberg. She has a weekly newsletter, which is really great. Highly advise going and subscribing to her newsletter. But she also had an investigation last week where Spotify does the same thing, where they turn a blind eye to these other, I guess, bot accounts that are set up to stream podcasts, to play podcasts. And when they were doing digging, when they were doing the research on this investigation, they were finding out that millions of plays were coming from one IP address, and that one IP address would only play like one entire album or only play one podcast, and they would just hit play and just keep it going on repeat. So that is the kind of like upper tier manipulation that is going on with some of these bigger platforms to make it seem like their shows are doing very well and it just a more budget, more advertising dollars, more sponsorship revenue. But I really am a vocal opponent against this because it messes it up for everybody else. It messes it up for the other folks who are doing the hard work and trying to break into the podcasting scene. But then you have other folks out here that are gaming the system and counting a radio broadcast as a podcast download when we all know that those are two vastly different things and two vastly different audiences. So just keeping that perspective in mind, it circles back to the earlier point that Badr was making, to keep your numbers and your perspective in mind, keep your ROI in mind, and just know that even though there are nefarious actors that are out there doing the wrong thing, getting exposed, but there are lots of reasons to look at some of these stats, especially the ones that Buzzsprout provides, and have that be more of a confidence boost to your own numbers and to your own goals. And those goals and numbers are going to be unique to every single podcast.
Said the person that works for iHeart just dropped from the call. They were like, "Oh boy, gotta get out of here."
They got to be made aware. They know too. So it's one of those things. Okay. Never heard of anybody listening to a podcast in iHeartRadio. If you do, that's kudos to you. But I've never done it. I've never seen iHeart as even ranking in any of my podcast plays. And so when I see them at the top of all of these pod chart rankings and things like that, I grew a little suspicious. And so I'm glad that Bloomberg and Ashley Carmen, they took the time to investigate what are these real numbers, because there's still podcasting, even though it's been around for so long, there still isn't a good barometer of success. And right now, everybody goes off, what are your downloads? And maybe we should move away from the download metric into metrics that make more sense for you and your show.
Said On the topic of stats, data, and things like that, I'll also champion two other resources. One's got to be a Buzzsprout one, right? But they, in addition to that monthly global stat page, they also produce this podcast stats and data blog post that it gives a little more detail to that global stat page. If that global stat page is, you can view that strictly as insight and tool to the podcast being hosted on the company. With the company. This one gives you an overall kind of look into the stat of listener behavior, most popular podcasts, the growth of podcasts, which I've got to say, I'm trying to find it here, the growth projections for podcasting. Anytime I see those numbers, it's just really reassuring that this medium isn't going anywhere. I'm trying to find it here. It's down at the bottom. But as you could tell, they break down so many helpful insights from podcast discovery trends. This one was pretty surprising to me that, what does it say here? 30% of new podcast listeners search the internet to find shows. Contrary to popular belief, it's not through social media. It's not. So if you're stressing out about how you're performing on pushing your podcast on social media, reading things like this kind of gives you the tools to re-strategize, or maybe just be reassured that you're maybe not, you're doing something right, or maybe you've got to just shift gears.
I think too, with that, what that chart is showing and what you showed earlier, if you're getting that, 30 plays an episode, and then to get into the next tier, you need about 50 plays an episode. That to me is marketing. Like that, if you're at that 30 kind of threshold, then you could just invest a little bit of your own time into marketing. We'll get into some of the tools that may be able to help with that later on, but that could easily get you over the hump of being able to get into that next upper echelon of getting more viewers, getting more awareness for your show, because podcast discovery remains the biggest challenge. And so you have to make your show discoverable. You have to be out there on social media, and then eventually build your podcast website. You can get one for free with Buzzsprout. I prefer my own because I can customize it a little bit more than what Podcast Host would be able to let you customize it. But there are ways to grow, and all of these charts hint to that.
Yeah. This one right here, the future of podcasting. It's been growing, at least just this chart alone dates back as 2017, but I found some earlier ones that date even further back, and the trajectory has just been up and up. This is interesting. This stat was interesting. Current estimates project that listeners in the U.S., right, just the U.S. alone, could increase from 75.9 million to 100 million listeners in the U.S. by next year. If you wanted a boost of confidence in regards to the growth and health of this medium, I think this is a great page to pair in connection with the global stats page. So that's a good one. And then one very quickly, this one was, I won't lie, I'll admit, this one was new to me. The Edison Research page, which Edison Research is the leading podcast research company in the world. They've conducted research for NPR, Spotify, ESPN, etc. And they have this survey called the Infinite Dial, and it's one of the longest running surveys when it comes to digital media consumer behavior. But they regularly publish reports in regards to how the medium is doing, how people are consuming podcasts and audio or digital media as well. So this is another good one as well in regards to getting a snapshot of where listeners are, where they're coming from, where they go, how their listening behavior, all things that could benefit how you strategize your marketing, where you have your podcast, who you target, etc. All right. I think we have probably spoken at least all the topics I had for stats and realistic goals. Do you want to shift into AI and tools?
Sure. I would imagine that the people listening to this have heard ChatGPT, AI, that's come onto the scene within the last few months. It's really dominated a lot of news, especially dominated a lot of the marketing world that I live in. But a few tools that I definitely wanted to shine a light on is, number one, first and foremost, Swell AI. They have quickly come right into my work processes and been able to really streamline and turn your transcriptions, your show notes, your podcast titles, and even social media posting, things like that. They have streamlined that entire process for me. So that is one tool that, for folks who may not be aware of a podcasting AI tool. So Swell AI, there's other ones that are out there as well that you can give it a try. It's called Decipher is another one. What you do is you either set aside a folder or like a Dropbox folder on your computer where you add new episodes, your audio file directly to that folder, Or what you can do is upload it directly to the system within Swell AI, or you can just link to your RSS feed and they will automatically import it. Now, for me and my work processes and my workflow, I would highly suggest that you take out your process of what it takes for you to publish a new episode. After you've got done recording the episode, what does that process look like for you to take it from a recorded episode to a published episode? Write down all of those things that you go through and then see where these tools, like I'm going to mention, fit into that process. So the first one for me is Swell AI. I mentioned they don't pay me to say this, should probably add that as a caveat. But what happens during that process is I typically schedule 2 to 3 podcasts a week. And so what I'll do is on a Sunday or on a Monday, I'll upload all of them. It takes about 10 minutes for them to fully process in getting your full transcript and then getting your show titles. It will spit out a few different show titles based on the episode itself. So you'll get pull quotes, you'll get a section on where you're gonna, or what you'll learn from that episode. And all of this is unique to each individual episode. I believe I get about 20 hours a week. So Badr just pulled it up on the screen. So it's a very just plain Jane background that you see here, but there's all the different upload options that you can see. And once you upload it, there's where Badr is showing you on that right-hand side, that view content, that's where you'll be able to find all of the different tools that they give you. So they have the full speaker or full transcriptions with speaker labels. You can export it to a Google Drive folder. You can export it to a freelancer, depending on what your process looks like. And also, one of the cooler things too that I have started playing around with is that you can use the power of ChatGPT on your podcast individual episodes. So say you have an hour-long episode and you also have a website, you could take an embed code very similar to a YouTube embed code or your podcast player embed code. You can take that little chat box and you can paste it, and it's specific to your episode. You paste it on your website, wherever you upload new episodes, then it will allow your listeners to be able to ask any kind of question about that episode. So I find that really useful, especially for maybe educational style podcasts, industry specific style podcasts. This is really great to start training your audience that if they want to be able to figure out if this show is for them, what they're going to learn from this episode, they can either read it in the show notes that are provided. And if you don't like any of these outputs, you could also just refresh it and it will make new ones for you. So I think, Bob, you're on, I don't think you pay for this. Am I correct in that? You get a few free downloads or you get a few uploads a month?
Yeah, I'm on that broke boy plan. So I just use the free plan. But it's only because I shifted to using Descript because it offers just about everything Swell AI does, or at least the main components I want, which is the transcript, well, mainly just the transcript, but they also a podcast editing video service. But anyways, I was using Swell AI. As you could tell, I think I used up all my free tokens this month. But what I liked about Swell AI was looking at the suggestions for the summary, right? Like the episode description, and seeing if there was a different way for me to tackle it that might be a little more, I guess, popular or SEO friendly, things like that. So between the summaries, I thought the timestamps was always a great feature as well, especially if you're not taking timestamps while editing. This gives you a pretty good idea of the big topics that you'd want to share. And then titles as well, like coming up, I guess for me, Swell AI and things like AI, if you're looking at them as a tool to maybe get rid of some of that decision making, right? To streamline that decision making, and I get a few options. What is it? This is the episode title. So I have a few options off the bat, and I can customize it if I feel like some of these are missing the point.
Yes.
So to Blythe's point, finding parts of your process and thinking, what are the parts I don't want to do? What are the parts that I just need maybe a list to pick from and automate? I think it's a great way to incorporate it.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing to keep in mind is that with AI tools right now, today is the worst they're ever going to be. They're only going to get better from here. So the more you use it, the more you get familiar with it, it can really help with not only the show notes portion of your podcast, but also with the promotion. Going back to Swell for a minute, I personally do not like their transcripts. I think their transcripts need a little bit of work. I know, Badr, I know you love the Descript transcripts. I personally love Otter.ai. My AI co-pilot is in here right now, listening to this conversation and transcribing it and taking notes. And then right after the conversation is over, everybody will get emailed with key takeaways from that episode. And so what I like to do is I will look at that Otter.ai, I will look at the transcript, and I will look at their key takeaways. That key takeaway will also hint towards what could make for a good social media clip. I saw there was a couple questions about marketing your shows and the social media aspect side of things. That personally helps me. I'm sure most of us in here are all one-person teams. So being able to have a hint of where I can go back into the episode and be able to pull a clip from social media helps a ton, and it cuts down on the time spent doing the post-production of your episode. It's turned my process from 3 hours to probably 20 minutes per episode. And while AI is I don't want to say never, it's not perfect, but it will get you about 80% there. And then you can massage it to get it to that 100% of where you feel comfortable publishing it. So Otter.ai, Descript are great for transcript. Descript is also great for editing your podcast, removing filler words like ums and ahs, long pauses, and then Descript is also really good for social media editing. I've recently started using Descript because I record in a video first format. So the other guest is on video, I'm on video, and I want to be able to have those clips like what on YouTube, on social media, TikTok. I want to be able to have those clips, and Descript is able to provide that for you in a much cleaner editing environment. So even if you're not using video today, if you don't have any plans to use video, you might want to consider recording in a video first environment, which maybe a lot of you do, but then you can think about using those. Maybe you never published to YouTube, but you could use clips from that video portion of your show to promote out to social media, because those are going to go a lot farther than say an audiogram or the little wavy lines on a photo that you post to Instagram. Those are going to go a lot further than some of these other marketing methods of trying to get your show out there, which all marketing is. If you're marketing your show, that's a good first step, but that next step is to see what is working well for other podcasters and see how you can use the same process and get that done yourself. And the good thing about it too is that a lot of these tools are very cost effective. Descript is about $20 a month, and you can edit video, audio, transcripts, make your social clips, and also push it directly to YouTube, push it directly to Buzzsprout, and a variety of other integrations. Now there's lots of people they're very picky. I know Badr's very picky about his editing process. I believe you use Audacity and Camtasia, but there's always room to grow with adapting new technologies or adapting new tools, but it really goes back to that initial process of what you mapped out and figuring out where software plays a role, because you're going to end up, if you just buy all the software things, you're going to end up with a very high bill and no work done, and you're going to waste a lot of time trying to learn these new tools. So just write out your process first, figure out where software plays a role, and then you can start experimenting with some of these different tools. Another one that I did want to quickly mention, two, Adobe podcast editing is very new. I think it's still in beta. I think you still have to request an invite to it, but from the videos that I've seen and my own personal experience using it, it is very good. It removes background noise. It makes your audio sound really crisp. I saw a demo of a guy that was using a vacuum cleaner in the background, and he edited his podcast with Adobe, and it cut out. If you weren't looking at the video and seeing the vacuum cleaner rolling, then you wouldn't have known that it was actually on in the background. So it's that good. And Adobe is coming out with a lot of different AI tools, especially I just played around with their logo maker the other day. It can make a logo for you for free. So if you're looking for show art, if you're looking for podcast art, then I would absolutely head over to Adobe and check out some of those new tools. And then the last one that I did want to mention, if you are recording and sending your podcast to YouTube, YouTube also has a podcast tab as well, but then you can use this tool. So once you send your podcast to YouTube, you can then take that URL, go to the site Opus Clips, OPUS clip.com, I think. Yeah, there you go. And all you have to do is paste the URL from the video, and it will take about 15 minutes, and it will cut 10 social media clips for you, just like the pros have, with captions, with those key moments from your episode. They're not going to be exactly perfect, but you can go in there and you can kind of mess with the settings, and you can get, out of 10 clips, I would guarantee that at least 4 or 5 of them are worth publishing. And for a lot of us, 4 or 5 clips is more than enough for every episode. So those are the tools that I have personally used, that I have. Some of them are now in my regular process, in my regular routine. And more of these tools are coming out all the time. And the thing that you want to think about when we talk about YouTube is that YouTube is placing a greater importance on podcasts itself too. And with a lot of these social media platforms, when you think about, okay, how do I get more discoverability, brand awareness around my show? That still works great for, say, a TikTok or Instagram to get your message out there. But YouTube is really the only platform that you can use both short form video and long form video. So you can use, I use this phrase all the time, but think of it as like a content drug dealer. You are sprinkling out your little short form videos in order to get people to come to the long form content. And so YouTube is really best positioned in order to take advantage of that strategy of using short form content, get that brand awareness, get that discoverability that YouTube is so powerful for, and hopefully it leads to the viewer seeing that clip and then wanting to watch more, and they go to the long form content, they subscribe to the podcast and all that good stuff.
The 30 seconds is free. The hour and a half is going to cost you nothing as well. I was going to try to show an example of Opus Clips, but it wants me to sign in. But trust me, it's as simple as Blythe said. You input URL for your full long form video, and it does spit out like 10 clips. And I tried it last week when Blythe first showed me. And I'll be honest, I think of the 10, 4 were ones that I'd be like, oh, I would definitely share that. Those are good enough to share. But I'm OCD and very controlling of my content. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick too, shout out to Alex for mentioning this. Buzzsprout also, for the Buzzsprout truthers out here, just like us, I haven't tried it yet, but Buzzsprout also has an AI feature available with their.
Badr, just rolled it out. Yep, right.
Can you explain? Have you had a chance to use this yet?
No, but if we want to try it, let's see if we can really quick. Let's see if it'll be too complicated. But from my understanding is much like Descript, like I was mentioning that that liked the suggestions, like the summary suggestion. Crap, I probably didn't do that. All right, well, I don't want to go ahead and trial this, embarrass myself. But my understanding is that they rolled out this co-host AI.
Click on that, learn more.
Let's see what happens. Oh, okay. I have to enable it. Okay. But let's see what it offers here. So you get episode title suggestions, show notes, chapter markers, and a transcript. Oh, and a transcript.
And it's only $20 a month. I would be saving $20 from Swell. There's.
I'm like, everyone close your eyes so I can input my credit card information. No, this is actually a wonderful addition, because this is everything I was using Swell AI. And we mentioned Descript. Descript offers a lot, especially if you're looking to replace your current podcast editing software or platform, or you want to upgrade to video editing. Like I'm in that weird middle spot where I'm still using my old process, but I'm also trying to incorporate new things. So I'm paying for something like Descript, but all I'm truthfully using it for at the moment is for transcription, because I think their transcriptions are done really well. And I've personally seen an uptick in downloads as well as my performance adding transcriptions, mainly because I also have a website for my podcast that loads those transcriptions in a blog post. It's good for SEO, blah, blah. So I think, to piggyback off what Blythe is saying, if you're someone like me that's been podcasting for 10 years that is very reluctant in upgrading and trying and incorporating new things because you feel safe with your current process, I highly recommend, even if it's baby steps, incorporating small things. I like to think of Descript and all these AI tools as very competent, like college interns. If I had to hire a college intern, what would I have them do? What are the tasks and annoyances or things that slow me down in my process that I wish I could pass off to someone that could do it pretty competently? And I think tools like Descript, Swell AI, and now Buzzsprout it's a great time to start thinking about these tools. It feels like we're in like an AI gold rush. And I think it's only a matter of time. Like for Descript, they've just, in the last maybe month, they started rolling out all these features. Like AI voices is new. I think transcription's always been their thing, but they've just been adapting to all the new features as well. So regardless of where you land or where your loyalties are, whether it's paying for Swell AI or Descript or Buzzsprout, I think everyone is trying to stay competitive and everyone's watching all the developments. And luckily, a lot of this stuff is open source. So a lot of these companies are incorporating it, which just means it's benefits for us. So yeah, shared a lot of different tools. Blythe, I wanted to go to QA. I think we've given a lot of information. Let's hear if anyone's got any questions.
Yes. So we have one that's related around marketing. It says, I'm looking to pay someone to do my social media marketing, but I'm not sure what the going rate is for strategy, implementation, and management. So far, I've gotten a really wide range of fees from $400 a month to $3,100 for strategy and implementation. What is a good rate? What should I bring to the conversation? Do you want to answer that first, or?
Hold on one second. I was trying to go through it. Sorry.
I'll take this one. So I would say that the wide range of fees is very normal because you have folks that aren't necessarily familiar with what your posting strategy looks like, how many times a week, how many platforms. All of that is going to play a role. Are you going to provide the assets to them to just upload and schedule? Because then you have to think about that post-production yourself. Are you going to be editing that stuff? Or are you going to have a social media agency be able to take a video file, maybe an edited video file, and be able to take that and make the clips themselves? I will say that I had the same experience. I was quoted a couple weeks ago to take my podcast or take the video portion and to turn it into social media clips, 4 videos a month, up to an hour for those 4 videos. They were going to watch it and make clips from each one, around 10 clips for each episode. They quoted me at $3,000. And then I said, okay, we're going to hold off on that. And then Opus Clips comes out a week later. So that solves a big problem for me, because they weren't going to schedule the post. They were just billing for their time to actually go through the content, which does take a lot of time to watch your content, find those good moments. And that's where the AI really comes into play, because it can find those inflection points in your voice. It can find certain keywords that you're using throughout the episode. And that's how it finds these different clips to use. It's not an exact science, but a free product is a hell of a lot better than spending $3,000 a month. So I would say to look at your own processes. I would say to look at what makes the most sense of, if you have video, I would highly suggest publishing to YouTube, at least having that additional sort of discoverability. YouTube is great for discoverability and finding shows that you normally wouldn't watch, related shows you can piggyback off of the episode. And plus, for a lot of podcasts, if I am given the choice of an audio version or a video version, I am watching the video version 10 out of 10 times, unless I'm driving or something like that, where it doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot. So I would figure out what your ideal process would look like. And then I would think about hiring a ghostwriter. Because the captions on your social media posts are vastly more important than anything else, because I would say the intro image of whatever you use on social media. Say, for example, there's one podcast that I follow a lot, and their posting strategy is to post an image of the podcast, and then you swipe for a video clip. Those kinds of different formats and strategies are changing all the time. So I would find a podcast that you look up to. What does their social media game plan look like? Dissect it and figure out, what do you like about their process? And then write down what your ideal process would look like, because then you can take that ideal process, practice it yourself, and then figure out what you like and what you don't like about that process. Because from my experience, even if you hire someone, there are still occasions where you're going to have to step in and you're going to have to do it yourself too, because they're going to get sick or they're going to take a week off to go on vacation. And then, or maybe you get to a point where it's better served that you invest that money in real advertisement, not mobile game advertisement. So you have I would map out your process first, do it yourself first, and then you have a better idea of what you want to do. what you would like to do and what you hate doing. And then you farm out to Fiverr or a freelancer and you say, this is exactly what I need done. You typically will give them access to a shared folder where those assets are uploaded to. So you can set up your distribution system long term where you can have maybe a podcast editor that edits the files and they upload it to a specific folder. And then that freelance content creator, maybe a ghostwriter, can see that content, write a cool caption for you, and get those scheduled up. Another caveat to keep in mind is that for a lot of these social media strategists, they're going to use third-party tools, and third-party tools are going to affect the overall reach of your organic post. So you want to also tell these people that they need to do direct uploads to these platforms. That's what helps the most. Instagram can tell if you're uploading a video with the TikTok watermark. YouTube can tell if you have a TikTok watermark or an Instagram Reels watermark. So you have to practice what you preach, or I practice what I preach, and going direct to these platforms, doing direct uploads, and then focus. Don't overwhelm yourself too. Pick one or two social media platforms tops. Focus on those, get those right, figure out what you like about your process, and then you can offload the rest of it to the process that you don't like. You can offload it to someone else. A good rate for these services is very subjective. That's why I suggest to map out those processes first, and then you can find a specific Fiverr freelancer that can handle one specific thing. But I would just recommend going after a ghostwriter first, because they can actually listen to what the clip is and be able to write a clever caption and be able to do a direct upload. And the next question, what do brands conferences look for in podcast stats to hire you as a speaker or to work with sponsorships? What does a brand pitch look like for a podcast? Okay, so a brand pitch, I would actually include your media kit. So you can make a media kit, you can go to Canva, and in order to, speaking of AI tools, they actually have a suite of fully AI tools within the Canva system. But you can go to Canva, find a media kit template, and you can make one yourself and be able to send it off to potential advertisers or sponsors. What I like to do is I like to actually interview the sponsors, because then they get a firsthand, invite them on your podcast, invite and talk to them, interview them. They have a great experience that they're more likely to want to invest in you in the future. I found a little bit of success with doing it, with taking that route. Another route that I would think about is for brands and conferences. I would also, it depends on the type of conference, if it's an industry conference or if it's one that's specific to your podcast as well. I like to look at who is sponsoring that conference and who is sponsoring podcasts that I look up to, and dissect what they're doing and who is advertising on their podcast and how they're structuring that advertisement. For example, I know Buzzsprout has an ads library where you can add different ads to your podcast. I personally go the opposite route with that. I like to have intimate relationships with, not intimate, I don't know what the right phrase is this, but I like to have personal relationships with my sponsors. And so for that, I will do a host read ad. I won't do the mattress ad or sleep number or meal kits or anything. I won't do those types of advertisements on my show. Number one, they pay you a very, very low bar. And if you actually go direct to work with sponsors, you're going to get much more of quality of the work that eventually is heard on your show. And then also you're going to get a higher premium by working direct. So that's what I would do, but also study the conferences that are in your industry or in your niche, and study the podcasts that are in your industry, in your niche, and they're doing a little bit better. See who's advertising there. And if they're advertising there, they're spending money. And if they're spending money there, there's a higher likelihood that they'll spend money with you.
Whew, mic drop right there.
Okay. Oh, email list too. That was the next question. Where did you guys start building email lists to start funnel people like a sales page? Start first and foremost, get a website, simple 4 or 5 page website. You don't need much. You can build a landing page on there. You can put other brands that you've worked with, people that you've interviewed. You can really use it as a showcase for your podcast to show all of the fantastic work that you've done. That also looks really good to sponsors and other brands that maybe want to collaborate with you because they know that you're serious. More than 90% of all podcasts fail after 10 episodes. If you want to showcase your podcast, the best way to do that is to show all the best work that you've been doing doing and highlight it. Make your own highlight reel. Use the website in order to gather emails for people who are interested in hearing more episodes, and then also to gather lead info for people who want to eventually sponsor an episode, sponsor a month, a quarter, 6 months, hopefully a year. Depends on what your advertising packages look like. And I need some water.
Okay. And then I'll go ahead and jump in here so you can refresh. All right. Her last question was, lastly, if anyone knows any social media strategists, I would appreciate recommendations. We'll leave that one up to the group. If anyone's got any recommendations in regards to social media strategists, leave that in the chat. All right. Good questions. And I want to address funny man Corey Torgerson over here. All right. Class clown Corey Torgerson and Warren Evans in the back. Corey had a question. I think that one was probably geared towards me. Are you happy? Have you been happy with Descript for transcript over Riverside? Yes, 100%. And that might have to do with the fact that Riverside is a great example of an existing platform that's adopting new tools, that's rolling out new tools to its users without really upcharging. I haven't noticed them increase their prices, but recently they got on the whole transcription game and offering, as soon as you're done recording, it'll spit out like a video podcast for you with transcription. And it kind of mimics Descript, where you can actually edit the video per the transcription. So you're not really editing via sound waves, but you're editing via transcription. Like you're deleting a whole sentence and it would cut that out of the recording. My issue is that I think my particular setup is that I have a co-host here with me in the studio. So it's technically receiving 2 audio files in one, and then obviously my guest or person on the other that called in. So I found that my unique setup is a little challenging for transcription. It's it's reading as one audio file. So that can be a little challenging, but long story short, I found that Descript, because I'm uploading the finished episode, it seems to read it just a lot better. And the fact that Descript also, their identify speaker, actually, here, I will show you what it looks like if you guys don't mind. Okay, so this is an example of the transcriptions I'm talking about. Like I said, I have found that adding transcriptions is a very quick step. I save it towards the very end. All of this, basically my podcast website it just rips everything here as a blog post. You know, all this text is very helpful in SEO, blah, blah, blah. But this is what my current transcription looks like. And it does obviously it spells my name wrong. It gets certain words wrong and all that. If you wanted to go through this with a fine tooth comb, I could find probably a bunch of grammar errors and misspellings and things like that. But for the most part, it identifies speakers really well. It could tell my voice between Ed's and Greg's. Now, obviously, if we're talking over one another, that's when it gets jumbled up, and I don't blame it at all. But the fact that it spits this entire transcription out for an hour and 20-minute episode, and I didn't have to do anything but upload the Descript, is fantastic. Like I said, Riverside, I will continue to pay for Riverside because I like recording in Riverside because it gives me video and the raw audio. But until I figure out how to fine tune it, I think I'm going to continue just using Descript for my transcriptions. I am curious to try out Buzzsprout though. If they're saying that their AI, which is $20 a month, does everything that like Swell and Descript does, I'm curious to see how good their transcription service is. But to answer your question, yes, I'm much happier using Descript instead of Riverside for transcriptions. And then I wanted to go back to, am I even sharing my screen? I wasn't even sharing my screen this whole time.
You were on a good flow.
I was. You know what it is? I keep forgetting to hit the share button. I click it and then I forget to hit share. My apologies. All right, I am sharing it this time, and it looks terrible because it's got all these windows. But let me just show it one more time. So the transcription, like I was saying, an hour and 20-minute episode, it breaks down by speaker, by timestamps. And the thing with Descript is you can actually change the current settings. Like you can make it show my name first and then the timestamp at the end. You can even fine tune that. You can even fine tune like the amount of gaps in between timestamps. I think I have it set to default, so it'll just write it out by who's speaking. But yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's a good, and it's very easy. Like I said, I'm just uploading an episode. It spits out a transcription. I might go through it, but it's way too long to be going through. To answer your question, yes. And then I wanted to add to Inda's question when she had asked about, I think the question was, what do brands/conferences look for in podcast staff to hire you as a speaker or work with sponsorships? And I'll say look, I ain't out here getting these sponsorship deals. Blythe is out here again. All right. She's killing it. As long as I've had sponsors on my show, which has been a couple of years, none of them have ever asked me for my stats or metrics. I have a comic book a local comic shop that's here in Jacksonville, Florida, that has sponsored the show for the last 3-4 years. And we do a quarterly sponsorship. They cut me a check every quarter to promote the shop. And then every year, I also get comic book conferences and conventions that ask me to run an ad on the podcast as well. They have never asked me for stats because I think for a few reasons. I think the lame regular person doesn't even know what are good stats, which was the topic of today, like the first topic. I think a lot of people don't have an idea of what realistic stats are. So they don't even know what to ask. They don't even know what they're measuring against. Obviously, if they're a company that's used to dealing with podcasters, I think that standard is 1,000 downloads an episode or 5,000. But for your everyday, like independent businesses and mom and pop shops that want to get into digital marketing, I think they really look towards you to give them that confidence. And luckily for me, the fact that I'm catering to his market, like the comic shop, Gotham City Limit, I didn't even pitch him. At one point, enough people had went into the shop. They knew that I was shopping there, buying comics. They would go in there and ask him if he heard about the short box. So it was a lot of word of mouth. And that was one thing I'm really proud about for my podcast is that we have a dedicated fan base where, you know, if I'm to ask them to, if I have a call to action, I'm confident that at least 10, 20 of them are going to take that call to action. And I think that means a lot. I read a headline a few months ago that was talking about some influencer that had millions of followers and constant engagement, was doing like a book signing or something like that, and they could not get 10 people to show up. And I think that is the reality. And that's
fake followers.
Yeah, possibly, right? 100%.
Heart.
And I think Alex wrote it in the chat as well. And I love that viewpoint. Even if you're getting 30, 50 downloads, or you have 30, 50 consistent, loyal followers, imagine them in a room. Imagine speaking to them at a convention center or something. That's a lot of people, right? And even if you get like 30 of them to buy a book of yours or to buy this product, that's strong. So I'll say that I've leveraged word of mouth and perception as well. I carry myself as the best comic podcast out there. The people that listen are willing to support and get our name out as well. You could go about it that route where you're not particularly showcasing. Even if you do decide to show your stats, I think even giving your potential sponsor like a crash course in education, showing them exactly what we showed you, right? Hey, here's where my stats are, and I'm already in the top 50, 25%. My location, if you're appealing to a Jax business, like in my case, I think 20% of my listeners are consistently from Jacksonville, right? So there is your target demographic. I talk comic books, they buy what you sell, and they're here in town. Like, who wouldn't want to at least take a gamble on that? I think there was another question. So hopefully that adds a little bit more. I think Corey had one more question that I really wanted to answer. And that was, where was it at? Sorry, I got to scroll down.
Oh, I think it was about the adding too many tools. Does it feel overwhelming? And yes, it does feel overwhelming.
Yeah, I think Corey wrote, do you feel like staying in the cutting edge of new process/technology is better than staying with your personal process that is tried and true? Or is there a balance that you slowly implement over time? This one spoke to me. I've been podcasting for 10 years and I, for the most part, have followed the same process. I want to say in the last 3 years, I have fine-tuned my process. Like it goes from here to the computer. I use Audacity, upload to Buzzsprout. I used a video for social media clips. Like I have a fine-tuned process that I don't feel like changing. But I also know that there are certain things that I don't want to do anymore that are time consuming, that after 10 years, I just don't feel like doing anymore. And if there's a way to make things, to do it quicker or have, like I said, a competent intern handle it for me, then I want to pursue it. The hard part is, as someone who feels confident in their process and is a one-man team for the most part when it comes to the back end of podcasting, I do all the editing, I do all the posting, et cetera, et cetera. I am very hesitant to try new things because I just don't feel like making mistakes. I don't feel like learning new things because it's time consuming. It's like, why try something new, possibly spend 2-3 hours getting it fine-tuned when I can just stick to the tried and true? And I think there's only so long I can go before eventually I'm missing out. Like I'm setting myself. It's definitely a challenge to set aside time to try and learn new technology, but you also don't want to get left behind. And who knows, by the time you get a handle on it, it might be worth dividends in the end. A little bit of investment an hour or two extra here to learn this new program might benefit in the long run, whereas damn, what took me an hour before takes me 5 minutes now. So hopefully that's insightful. Is there any other
But don't
questions?
be afraid to try new tools either.
I heard you, Blythe. I get it. I'm going to try it. All right.
Oh, great question about everyone's podcast. That actually brings up a good opportunity we actually have a Jacksonville Podcasters directory. So if you have a podcast and you haven't submitted already, be sure to go to jaxpodcastersunite.com, submit your show, and we'll get you added to the directory. I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat just to check it out. But here are all of the local Jacksonville podcasters, which we have a bunch, but you can select by topic. This all ties into your RSS feed. So whatever category you have selected on within your podcast host, then you'll be filtered into that category within the site itself. You do not have to be, it doesn't have to be Jacksonville local focused in order to be listed in the directory. You just have to be a Jacksonville podcaster. But we list them in here. We have some new marketing that we're going to be doing. We actually have an LLC now for the JPU. So we're actually treating this less as a hobby and more as a business. So that's why you're seeing this virtual event tonight. We're probably going to talk about it here in a little bit about future events coming up, both virtual and in person. So we got some cool stuff coming up, and we want to do more of these virtual lessons because it's definitely more interactive. A lot of folks can't make the in-person ones, and this is a way for us to showcase our knowledge, because for a lot of people out there, you don't necessarily hear from the folks who are in the trenches building a podcast that covers a specific topic, right? So you have maybe something, if you go to a podcast conference, you'll see a lot of talks on how to make money from your podcast and things like that. But those are generally taught by people who haven't actually built a podcast themselves. And so that's where Badr and I really, that's our lane. We've done it in addition to running a full-time job. I'm lucky enough now that I do get a full-time income from podcasting, but it took 10 years, more than 10 years of work to get to this part, or to get to this portion of my career. But that's why we're so passionate about this group and so passionate about this project, is because we are able to offer that in the trenches insight, that in the trenches knowledge that you guys are experiencing just as much as we are. And that's what the goal of this site, that's the goal of this group, is to be able to help you cut to the chase and cut through our years of experience in order to help you grow your show faster.
Said. And I'll go ahead and add too, for anyone that maybe, I think there was a few folks maybe that haven't started a podcast, that don't have anything to submit to the directory just yet. If you want to stay up to date with our events, and we're getting our email newsletter built up as well, if you scroll to the bottom of the website, you can just enter your email that way and subscribe to everything we got going on that way as well. But highly recommend, if you have a podcast, submit your show to the directory. I think I had it pulled up a few seconds ago, but any plays, or if someone comes across this that is maybe a hyper Jacksonville or fan of supporting everything in Jax, if they play your episode here, the downloads count towards yours, right? Like there's no risk whatsoever.
It's extra distribution for your show.
Exactly. So submit your show up top. And I believe it was Francis that had asked us in the chat about the targeting or advertising your podcast to Jacksonville in specific. I think if your show isn't Jax specific, then maybe continue marketing your podcast to a wider audience. But if you do want to do more things Jax related, as someone who for the longest time only had my blinders on for being Jacksonville's comic book podcast, I'll tell you some of the things that worked for me. For starters, print media. I used to print. I've always looked at. I'm a huge hip hop head, so I've always looked at record labels, my favorite record labels, and street teams, and how they market their artists and their albums. For the most part, everything that's done in like music, I've always felt is applicable to podcasting in terms of marketing. So I adopted a lot of those strategies early on, where I was printing out flyers and posters and going to comic shops, bookstores, movie theaters, and asking if I could put up my flyer, put up my poster, and put a stack of flyers there. You'd be surprised by how many people in those early years would send us an email and say, yo, I seen your poster at this shop and I checked out the podcast. Yo, I just picked up your flyer from this store, checked out the podcast. Print media worked out for me. And then even events too. Like we were offering our services to movie theaters, right? Like when they would premiere comic book movies or the latest MCU movies, we'd offer to do a giveaway, or just let us get in front of the folks and do a giveaway, or at least introduce the movie, and it costs you nothing. We won't charge. We just want that exposure. So I think just like getting out in front of your core demographic goes a long way for them to place a face to the voice that they're about to hear and things like that. Hell, earlier this month, big holiday and a big kind of retail event in comic books is called Free Comic Book Day. Every year I go hit up the shop that sponsors us and I grab my recorder and I get quick little street style interviews, little 3-5 minute interviews. And I put that out as an episode. So now people are like, oh shit, this guy is here in my hometown. He's got a podcast and I get to hear myself. Like, let me go check that out or tell someone I know that might be interested in that. And I found things like that really work. But once again, it's because I am talking about a hobby, a topic that is applicable to Jacksonville. There are comic shops, there's fans of comics here in town that I could reach through these avenues.
Yeah, you're definitely really good at the guerrilla marketing. I think at our house, we have a box that comes from Sticker Mule at least once a month.
That is a very good point. And was that Francis? Yeah, I think it was either Francis or Rich. I'll mention one other thing that I've started doing is that I've been going to comic conventions because, once again, it's thinking, who are my demographic? Who are my ideal listeners? Where did they go? And luckily, I am those same people that I'm trying to target. So where do I normally go? So when I go to comic conventions now, I've got like a stack of flyers. I've got pins that I give away for free. And then I started incorporating like those little NFC chips where you could program like a link, right? And when someone taps their phone against it, it asks to open the link. I've been handing those out. So it looks like I'm handing out old school pogs for you 90s kids. And people are like, whoa, this is really cool. And they get a chance to check out the podcast that way. So it's just thinking like outside of the box. If you have the opportunity to interact with potential listeners in person, there's just that, it's just a level up from saying, hey, check out my podcast. There's something intimate and tangible they can hold. All right. Oh, Corey brought up a good point. The live shows too. He said Badr's in-person introduction and Straight Chillin's first live show are the reason I listen to those podcasts. Once again, like just thinking, Alex said, what are pogs? What happened to pogs?
Also, collaborating on other shows. Yes. Alex, this is probably a great time for maybe you to talk about Podmatch and being a guest on other people's show. That's also a great way to grow your audience because it's a little bit of, I don't want to say leeching off of their audience, but it's in a good way. You could do guest swaps and things like that, which work out really well, especially if that podcast is in your niche, because you can increase your discoverability in that regard, because they've already done the hard work of earning their audience. And if they like that topic, then they'll likely come over and follow you as well.
Yeah, and I'll drop. Oh, go ahead, Alex. Yeah, I didn't know.
If you want me to say something, I didn't want to
do it.
Thanks for that plug. Yeah, for me, being a guest on podcasts has been really good for growing my show, but also just finding the right guests, not necessarily big names, but just the right guest help a lot when you bring on the right people, because the right people will share it because it's going to be a good conversation. For anyone not familiar with Podmatch, it's a software that automatically connects podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. I like to say it works just like a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. And it's got built-in monetization on it for the host side as well. So if you're just interviewing people using the platform, it will automatically give you a cut. So would love to see some of you on there if it makes sense. But thanks for giving me the chance to plug that. I appreciate it.
Heck yeah. We have a little bit of almost like a dynasty growing in Jacksonville with Buzzsprout being here, Podmatch. We got the JPU, of course. Am I forgetting anybody else as far as podcast companies? We have a bunch of new studio suites. We have, what's the other one? Shannon's downtown, her studio. So we've got different. So those different solutions will really help a ton if you're looking for guests. So hit up Podmatch if you're looking for guests. And then also from a local perspective, if you really want to score if you have a good interview with a high profile guest and you really want to impress them and you don't necessarily have that set up at your home, you can go to Gary at Studio Suites or Shannon over at Mixed Theory, and you can rent a studio for less than $100 and you can have a great showcase for your show, get the audio file, get the video file, and you can leave a lasting impression, maybe on a really good guest that hopefully would become a sponsor afterwards.
And I'm dropping the links for these studios, in the chat as well. But you bringing up the talent that we have in regards to podcasting here in Jax reminds me of One other thing that we wanted to mention before we close out, and before I say that, last call for any questions. If you got a burning question or something you want us to touch on while we still got a little bit of time, please drop that in the chat while I say, well, I've said it all really. When it comes to podcasting in Jax, I feel like it's never been stronger in regards to Buzzsprout, JPU, Podmatch, the different podcast studios. And I feel like there's still even more assets and people out there doing great things that we have yet to meet. So I'm excited to continue seeing the JPU grow and become like a central hub for podcasting in the 904, which brings us to, I guess you guys are getting an exclusive, all of you that are on board, in regards to our next events. Like I said, we want to do more virtual events because it gives us the opportunity to really dive into topics. Obviously, we could share screens and things like that. But our goal, we have some big dreams and big goals for the JPU in regards to elevating what we offer and being of service to all of you podcasters and everyone in the community. We have 2 ambitious events that we want to try to do before the year is over. And we can't share a bunch of details because we both believe in not just teasing things and not being able to actually get them done. But one of them would be an educational series where it's hands-on training and in regards to podcasting, from newbie to a published episode in one sitting. We're hoping to offer an educational, hyper-focused educational event this year. And then one other one that we'll keep under wraps, but that one will really be a celebration of all things podcast here in Jax. So
more info to come. Don't spill the beans yet. We're not ready yet.
I won't. But yeah, we've got some ambitious goals for the JPU, and we're hoping that you guys continue being down for the ride.
Heck yeah. Very well said.
All right. Any last minute question? Did we get anything? Okay, let's see. Should we have release forms for, Francis has got one. Should we have release forms for our guests if they are family, friends, and or strangers?
No. I think it prohibits or it adds an extra layer of, should I actually go on this show? Worry to the guest. So I've been doing podcasting for more than 10 years or close to 10 years. And I've never once been asked to sign a guest release. And I've done major interviews on major platforms, ESPN, Fox, a bunch of other different platforms. They've never asked me to sign an NDA. They've never asked me to sign a guest release form. I would hammer out those details ahead of time, but I wouldn't ask your guest to sign that form. It really offers really no protection whatsoever. And I think it also adds a level of almost like anxiety for the guest to appear, because you want to facilitate a good conversation. You want to facilitate and you want to make sure that they're coming to a safe place to have that conversation. So what I personally do is I tell folks, if you say something that you are, before every recording, I'm like, if you say something that you absolutely don't want in the show, I am willing to take it out. And I say that because I'm not an investigative journalist. I want to set my guests up for success. I want them to come on the show and be able to feel completely comfortable. So I don't want to add that extra layer of anxiety to them. I want them to be able to feel fully comfortable and talking openly and honestly. I would say I've recorded probably over 500 episodes in my total career, but I would say there's only been less than 5 instances where somebody has asked me to take something out, and that's only because they misworded it or it was an announcement that they weren't quite ready to make.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that too, that I don't think I've ever given a release form or anything like that, and I've interviewed a good bit of folks. I think giving them that reassurance early on, I always try to do a prep. Hey, this isn't live. We can re-record anything, stop me at any moment. And there's also time in editing. So I think just giving them that reassurance that you're not out to get them. This isn't gotcha journalism.
Yes.
This is just a podcast and things like that, I think goes a long way.
Yes, this isn't PBS Frontline. We're not working for major news organizations. We are having conversations, not dissertations.
Yeah. That'd be wild if I got one for a comic book interview.
I'd be like, what is this?
You work for the CIA? All right. Any other questions? Anything else? Any other topics we could talk about? This has been a really good conversation. I was expecting, we're at 8:00, but
it flew by.
A little more. All right. Last call. All right. While you guys are figuring that out, once again, if you guys will do us a big favor, sign up for our email blast on jaxpodcastersunited.com. If you have a podcast, submit your podcast to the official Jax Podcasters directory. And stay tuned for what else we got coming up. Like I said, we got some ambitious and big goals for the Jax podcast community.
Very well.
And I don't think we've got anything else. I think we did our job.
They're tired
today,
of hearing us talk.
Yeah, they're like, I'm hungry.
Go spend some time with your family.
Dinner. All right, y'all. We appreciate everyone that hung out today, that kept the chat lively as well. Some really great conversations being had. A lot of great questions. Yeah, for sure. Great questions, great topics. You guys have a great and fantastic evening, and this won't be the last time you hear from us at all. All right? Be well, everyone. Peace.
Bye.